Crossovers are the entertainment world's equivalent of pouring cola into orange juice. Technically, it works. But the taste? Questionable. The 1970s and 80s were obsessed with this Frankenstein experiment, mashing up cartoon universes in ways that made audiences either laugh, cringe, or just sit in stunned silence. So, let me ask you, what happens when cavemen share screen time with stretchy white blobs, or Scooby-Doo bumps into superheroes in tights? Stick around, because some of these crossovers are so bizarre, they feel like fever dreams nobody was supposed to remember. The Jetsons meet the Flintstones, 1987. What happens when futuristic flying cars slam head-first into the Stone Age? Apparently, you get an entire made-for-TV movie. The Jetsons Meet the Flintstones was Hanna-Barbera's grand attempt to answer a question nobody really asked. What if George Jetson went on vacation and ended up in bedrock? Time travel hijinks aside, the plot is basically, the Jetsons fall into the Stone Age, the Flintstones go to the future, and the result is as chaotic as it sounds. What makes this crossover especially strange is the cultural whiplash. The Flintstones, inspired by blue-collar 1960s suburbia sitcom life, suddenly share screen time with a space-age family who basically live inside an endless series of gadgets and conveyor belts. Watching Wilma Flintstone marvel at a treadmill sidewalk while Jane Jetson struggles with stone tools is surreal in all the wrong ways. The animation itself screams late 80s Hanna-Barbera, full of recycled loops and characters who look slightly too shiny for their own worlds. Critics were divided. Some kids loved the novels, as adults rolled their eyes and wondered if the studio had officially run out of ideas. Yet, the movie lives on in nostalgia lists, not for being good, but for proving that cartoon multiverses existed long before Marvel made it profitable. In the end, The Jetsons Meet the Flintstones is less about timeless storytelling and more about Hanna-Barbera waving at its own legacy. You can almost hear the boardroom pitch. Why not just throw them together? And so they did. Fred and Barney Meet the Thing, 1979. The title promises greatness. The execution delivers. Reruns. Fred and Barney Meet the Thing sounds like an earth-shattering crossover where Bedrock's most famous residents team up with Marvel's Rocky Orange powerhouse from Fantastic Four. Imagine Barney trying to light his cigar off the Thing's flaming buddy, or Fred yelling "Yabba Dabba Doom" as they battle a villain. Sadly, none of that ever happens. In reality, this Saturday morning crossover was more like a scam. Hanna-Barbera repackaged reruns of the new Fred and Barney show alongside episodes of The Thing, a Marvel-inspired cartoon where a teenager named Benji Grimm turns into the Thing by clinking together magic rings. Yes, you heard right. The Thing was suddenly a high school kid with a Shazam-style transformation. Gimmick, completely divorced from his comic book origin. And Fred and Barney, they never share a single frame with him. The real kicker is how shamelessly the show leaned into its misleading title. Kids tuned in expecting a Stone Age superhero mashup, but instead got separate segments stitched together. It's like buying a combo meal and realizing the burger and fries are in different restaurants. Fans of the comic were horrified at the bizarre teen makeover, while Flintstones fans just scratched their heads. Even by Hanna-Barbera standards, this was cheap. It remains one of the most infamous crossovers of the era, not because of what it delivered, but because of what it refused to. To this day, Fred and Barney Meet the Thing feels like an inside joke, except nobody's laughing. Fred and Barney Meet the Shmoo, 1979. If you thought Fred and Barney not meeting the Thing was awkward, wait until you hear about the time they met the Shmoo. The Shmoo was a Hanna-Barbera take on a character from Al Cap's comic strip Lil Abner, a white blob-like creature with eyes, a smile, and the ability to shapeshift into anything. Imagine an egg, a balloon, and a marshmallow all rolled into one, then given a cheerful personality. Naturally, Hanna-Barbera decided this oddball belonged in the same Saturday morning block as Bedrock's most famous residents. But here's the twist. Just like The Thing fiasco, Fred and Barney never actually meet the Shmoo either. Once again, it was two separate shows clumped together and sold under one big title. The Flintstones handled their usual prehistoric antics, while the Shmoo went around solving mysteries in a Scooby-Doo style format. The Shmoo even had his own teen detective gang, because apparently every animated blob needs one. The Shmoo's presence alone was odd enough. He was a product of 1940s satire suddenly revived in 1970s. Saturday morning fashion, like someone dusted off a relic and thought, kids love goo, right? But pairing him with Fred and Barney in the title made things even more confusing. It was as if Hanna-Barbera was throwing every random intellectual property they had into a blender, hoping some kid would watch out of sheer curiosity. So, while Fred and Barney Meet the Shmoo was technically another bait and switch, it at least gave us the joy of watching one of the strangest cartoon mascots of the decade get another run. Still, it proved one thing. Hanna-Barbera loved dangling the Flintstones' names in front of audiences, even if Bedrock stars never showed up to the party. The new Scooby-Doo Movies, 1972 to 1973. If Scooby-Doo is a magnet for mysteries, then the 70s version of Scooby was a black hole for celebrity cameos. The new Scooby-Doo movies stretched the formula by making each episode a full hour, and to fill that time, Hanna-Barbera decided to invite guest stars. Lots of them. We're talking everyone from Batman and Robin to Don Knotts, Sonny, and Cher, and even the Harlem Globetrotters. Yes, Scooby-Doo went from chasing ghosts to sharing jokes with random A-listers of the time. The results were predictably weird. Batman and Robin felt somewhat natural, turning episodes into campy superhero mysteries. But watching the gang solve a haunted mystery alongside Don Knotts, who just kinda wandered around being nervous, was a tonal shift that can only be described as surreal. The Harlem Globetrotters episodes basically stopped being mysteries altogether and just turned into basketball exhibitions with laugh tracks. From a marketing standpoint, it was genius. The show blurred the line between kids' cartoons and celebrity variety shows, letting networks promote guest stars to parents while still giving kids their Scooby fix. But as storytelling, it was all over the place. Every week felt like pulling a new name out of a hat and forcing them into a haunted carnival. What makes it stranger in hindsight is how serious fans take Scooby-Doo lore now. The show has been rebooted into darker, more serialized versions since. But back in the 70s, Hanna-Barbera was perfectly happy throwing Laurel and Hardy into a haunted mansion with Shaggy and calling it a day. It's chaotic, cheesy, and somehow still iconic, a true product of its era. The Harlem Globetrotters meet Scooby-Doo, 1972. Scooby and the Harlem Globetrotters deserve their own separate entry, because while they first collided in the new Scooby-Doo movies, they went on to have full-fledged specials together. And let's be honest, nothing screams cartoon crossover excess quite like a talking Great Dane and a basketball team solving mysteries on a ghost ship. The premise was simple. Mystery Inc. runs into the Globetrotters, spooky stuff happens, and eventually the ball players save the day using basketball tricks that somehow double as ghost fighting moves. Picture Meadowlark Lemon spinning a basketball so fast it knocks over a villain in a rubber mask, while Scooby hides in a barrel for comic relief. It's as goofy as it sounds. The absurdity wasn't lost on audiences either. By this point, the Globetrotters were everywhere in pop culture, starring in cartoons, TV specials, and even teaming up with Gilligan from Gilligan's Island. Pairing them with Scooby-Doo felt like another way to extend their brand into Saturday mornings. But in execution, it was less two worlds collide, and more, basketball is now a ghost-busting weapon. The animation reused the same tricks from Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, but with extra slapstick to showcase the Globetrotters' talents. The result was entertaining, sure, but deeply strange. Scooby-Doo works because the mysteries are just grounded enough to be fun. Add in the Globetrotters pulling Harlem-style antics, and suddenly the tone skews into pure absurdity. Still, kids loved it, and reruns kept this odd crossover alive for years. It proved that Hanna-Barbera was willing to pair Scooby with literally anyone, and the Harlem Globetrotters were just the beginning. The Scooby-Doo Dynomutt Hour, 1976. Just when you thought Scooby had teamed up with enough random celebrities, Hanna-Barbera doubled down and threw in a robot dog sidekick. The Scooby-Doo Dynomutt Hour was basically two shows stitched together, One half featured the familiar mystery insider crew, while the other focused on Dynomutt, a mechanical mutt sidekick to superhero Blue Falcon. On paper, combining them made sense. Both were mystery-driven, both aimed at kids who liked goofy humor. But in practice, it was like peanut butter and motor oil. Dynomutt was billed as the dog wonder, but most of the time he was less helpful sidekick and more walking mechanical failure. His gadgets constantly malfunctioned, which usually meant Scooby and Shaggy spent as much time running from him as they did from any villains. Watching a Great Dane panic while a robot dog accidentally drills holes in the floor was chaos even by Hanna-Barbera standards. The crossover worked best when Blue Falcon joined the gang for cases. Suddenly you had Shaggy screaming at ghosts while a dead serious superhero tried to treat things like Gotham City. The tonal clash was half the fun and half the headache. For Hanna-Barbera, it was another experiment in creating Saturday morning block synergy. Why sell two shows separately when you can cram them together and call it an hour? For kids, it was a strange roller coaster. One moment you're solving mysteries in haunted mansions, the next, you're watching gadgets malfunction in slapstick slow motion. Looking back, the pairing is more nostalgic oddity than classic. The Scooby half still holds up as camp fun, but the Dynomutt half feels like a forgotten beta test for cartoons trying to blend superhero antics with comedy. It's weird, messy, and very 70s. The Scooby-Doo All-Star Laff-A-Lympics, 1977 to 1978. Imagine the Olympics, but instead of athletes, you get a massive crossover of Hanna-Barbera's entire cartoon catalog. That's exactly what Laff-A-Lympics was. This series brought together three teams, the Scooby-Doobies, the Yogi Yahooies, and the Really Rottens, to compete in zany contests around the world. It wasn't about solving mysteries or chasing villains. It was about watching cartoon mascots hurl up pies, bungle stunts, and cheat their way through competitions. The scope alone was insane. Dozens of characters from different Hanna-Barbera shows all crammed into one cartoon coliseum. Scooby-Doo was suddenly shoulder to shoulder with Hong Kong Phooey, Huckleberry Hound, and Captain Caveman. It was like Avengers, Endgame, except every hero's power was slapstick comedy. Of course, the Really Rottens were always up to no good, cheating their way through every challenge. The fact that they almost always lost in the end didn't stop the formula from repeating week after week. Watching cartoon villains tie weights to hang gliders or rigs. Pie-eating contests was equal parts predictable and ridiculous. For kids, though, this was pure crossover candy. Suddenly, you didn't need to choose between your favorite characters. They were all in the same arena. For Hanna-Barbera, it was a way to maximize their catalog, basically turning their entire stable of shows into one big Saturday morning mega brand. Today, Laff-A-Lympics stands as one of the strangest and most ambitious crossover experiments of its era. It didn't always make sense, but it didn't have to. It was about the novelty of watching Yogi Bear try to outswim Scooby-Doo in a relay race. And honestly, that's exactly the kind of weirdness Saturday mornings were made for. The Super Globetrotters, 1979. As if seeing the Harlem Globetrotters team up with Scooby-Doo wasn't bizarre enough, Hanna-Barbera decided to reinvent the basketball team as literal superheroes. Enter the Super Globetrotters, a show where the already larger-than-life players gained bizarre powers and fought crime in between basketball stunts. If you thought slam dunks were impressive, wait until you see a player morph into liquid or turn his afro into a weapon. Yes, these were their actual powers. Each Globetrotter had a strange gimmick. One could flatten himself like paper, another transformed into a spinning sphere, and one even used his hair as a tool for crime fighting. Forget basketball. These were basically second-string X-Men with sneakers. The villains they fought weren't much better. Hanna-Barbera threw together generic evil organizations and costume crooks for the Globetrotters to foil. And of course, each battle ended with some Harlem-style flair, because even while saving the world, the team had to keep the showboating alive. What makes this crossover so strange is how far removed it is from the actual Globetrotters. These were real-life entertainers known for comedy basketball, suddenly rewritten as crime fighters who solved global threats with cartoon superpowers. It was part branding, part Saturday morning nonsense, and entirely surreal. Looking back, the Super Globetrotters feels less like a cartoon and more like a fever dream. The players were already superheroes in their own way on the court, so giving them cartoon powers pushed things into parody territory. Still, for kids at the time, it was unforgettable, and for collectors today, it's one of those "did this really happen?" moments of animation history. The Fonz and the Happy Days Gang, 1980 to 1982. Take one of the most popular live-action sitcoms of the 70s, strip out the nostalgia, add time travel, and slap a talking dog on top. Congratulations, you now have the Fonz and the Happy Days Gang. Yes, Hanna-Barbera actually turned Happy Days into a Saturday morning cartoon, where Fonzie, Richie, and Ralph get trapped in a malfunctioning time machine with a future girl and a dog named Mr. Cool. If that description sounds like 3 different shows crammed into one, that's because it was. The episodes had the gang bouncing from ancient Rome to the Wild West, all while Fonzie kept his cool guy image intact. The laugh track of the original sitcom was replaced with zany slapstick and Mr. Cool's antics, which were basically Scooby-Doo leftovers. Henry Winkler, Ron Howard, and Don Most actually voiced their characters, which gave the show a strange authenticity, but it didn't help the absurd concept. Watching Fonzie snap his fingers to fix history, or Richie getting chased by knights, was far removed from the diner booths and jukeboxes of Milwaukee. The crossover element came from slapping a beloved sitcom into the Hanna-Barbera Saturday morning format, and the result was one of the strangest genre mashups of the decade. Was it science fiction, comedy, nostalgia, bait? Nobody really knew. In the end, the Fonz and the Happy Days Gang lasted only 2 seasons before fading into cartoon obscurity. It remains a bizarre example of how studios in the 80s would try anything, even rewriting sitcom icons as time-traveling adventurers with a Scooby-clone sidekick. The New Fred and Barney Show with guest stars, 1979. By the late 70s, the Flintstones brand had been stretched thinner than a Brontosaurus burger. The New Fred and Barney Show tried to revive the caveman duo with fresh stories, but Hanna-Barbera couldn't resist their favorite trick, crossovers. So, the show often featured odd guest appearances from other Hanna-Barbera properties, including characters like Captain Caveman, who became a recurring neighbor, and even weird holiday specials that pulled in random side characters. The problem? These cameos rarely made sense. One week, Fred and Barney are dealing with suburban bedrock problems. The next, they're sharing the screen with a superhero caveman who pulls gadgets out of his fur. It was like 2 different genres colliding with no warning. Hanna-Barbera was clearly trying to boost ratings by mixing their properties into one universe. But the result was a tonal grab bag. Some kids loved seeing Captain Caveman pop in, while others wondered why the Flintstones suddenly felt like a revolving door of side acts. The show didn't last long, but it left behind one undeniable truth. Hanna-Barbera would never stop milking crossovers, no matter how bizarre. For Fred and Barney, it was just another case of their names being slapped onto whatever idea the studio could cobble together. The Scooby-Doo Batman team-ups, 1972 and 1973. Before gritty Batman films dominated the box office, the Caped Crusader was showing up in Scooby-Doo episodes, wearing spandex and delivering public service announcements. The Scooby Gang's most famous crossover came in the new Scooby-Doo movies, when Batman and Robin popped up in 2 episodes to help solve mysteries. And let's be clear, this wasn't moody, brooding Batman. This was Adam West-style camp, with villains like the Joker and Penguin acting more like clowns than criminal, all masterminds. The episodes themselves were basically Scooby-Doo mysteries, with Batman slapped on top. Picture Shaggy and Scooby screaming at a haunted carnival, while Batman delivers a lecture on civic duty. Robin, meanwhile, tried his best to be useful, but mostly played the role of awkward sidekick. Even the Batmobile got stuck in goofy situations that made it look more like a toy than a crime-fighting machine. What makes these crossovers so bizarre is how natural the show pretended they were. Nobody blinked at the fact that Batman and Robin suddenly showed up in a haunted mansion. Fred didn't question it, Velma didn't analyze it, and Daphne just rolled with it. For kids, it was a dream mashup. For adults, it was comedy gold. Looking back, these episodes are classics precisely because of their weirdness. They're time capsules of a Batman who was more about cheesy fun than dark brooding, paired with a Great Dane who runs from shadows. It's strange, silly, and unforgettable. Yogi's First Christmas, 1980. If you thought holiday specials were safe from crossovers, think again. Yogi's First Christmas wasn't just a festive tale about a bear discovering the joys of the season. It was a full-blown Hanna-Barbera reunion special disguised as a Christmas movie. Yogi Bear, Boo Boo, Cindy Bear, Snagglepuss, Augie Doggy, and a whole lineup of Hanna-Barbera stars showed up to celebrate together at a mountain resort. The setup was simple. Yogi usually hibernates through Christmas, but this time he's woken up and gets to join the festivities. Along the way, every other Hanna-Barbera character you can think of strolls into the lodge, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. It's basically Avengers Assemble, but instead of superheroes saving the world, cartoon animals are decorating a Christmas tree. The strangest part is how seamlessly the studio tried to stitch all these characters together. One minute, Yogi is handing out presents. The next, Huckleberry Hound is belting out a carol. And then Snagglepuss is making wisecracks by the fireplace. The tone swings wildly from heartfelt to absurd, but the nostalgia factor was undeniable. For Hanna-Barbera, this was branding gold. Bring every popular character under one snowy roof, slap a bow on it, and call it a holiday classic. For audiences, it was a crossover fever dream that somehow became a Christmas tradition. Casper and the Angels, 1979. By the late 70s, Hanna-Barbera was desperate to ride the coattails of Charlie's Angels. Their solution? Casper and the Angels, a show that mashed up the friendly ghost with futuristic space cops. Yes, really? Casper floated around as a moral voice, while two women in tight space uniforms, Minnie and Maxie, battled criminals in a Jetsons-style future. The crossover didn't even pretend to make sense. Casper, who had always haunted small towns and befriended children, was suddenly patrolling a neon sci-fi city with law enforcement. He didn't even do much ghostly haunting. Instead, he just lectured villains or offered cheerful advice while the Angels did the actual fighting. The show lasted only one season, but its sheer strangeness makes it unforgettable. Watching Casper awkwardly inserted into a formula that clearly wasn't built for him is like seeing a puppy at a boxing match. He was out of place, but the studio forced him into it anyway. If the intent was to modernize Casper for a new generation, this wasn't the way. Instead, Casper and the Angels became another bizarre experiment in cartoon crossovers that proved not every character belongs in every genre. Still, as far as what were they thinking moments go, this one ranks high. The Flintstones comedy show, 1980 to 1982. You'd think by the 80s Hanna-Barbera would let the Flintstones rest. But no, they retooled them again into the Flintstones comedy show, a one-hour block stuffed with crossovers and spin-offs. This wasn't just Fred and Barney anymore. Now they were sharing the screen with the Frankenstones, Captain Caveman, Pebbles, and Bam Bam, and random side characters who seemed plucked out of a studio filing cabinet. The Frankenstones were basically knockoff Addams Family neighbors, complete with a spooky mansion in the middle of bedrock. Captain Caveman, meanwhile, popped in with his usual slapstick superhero antics, which felt wildly out of place next to Fred arguing about garbage duty. The result was a tonal buffet. One minute you're watching a standard Flintstones gag about dinosaurs used as household appliances. The next, you're knee-deep in monster comedy with the Frankenstones. It felt like the writers couldn't decide whether the show was sitcom parody, superhero spoof, or Halloween special. The comedy show didn't last long, but it remains one of the strangest examples of Hanna-Barbera's habit of throwing everything at the wall. By this point, the Flintstones weren't just characters anymore, they were mascots propping up every experiment the studio had. The result? A chaotic but oddly charming mess. Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf, 1988. We end with one of the strangest Scooby-Doo movies ever made, Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf. By the late 80s, Hanna-Barbera was pumping out direct-to-TV Scooby specials, and this one went full Monster Mash. The plot? Shaggy is suddenly transformed into a werewolf by Dracula, and the only way to turn back is to win a monster car race against a lineup of ghouls. Yes, it's basically wacky races, but with Universal-style monsters. The film is a bizarre stew of horror parody, slapstick, and Scooby-Doo panic. Shaggy doesn't just grow fangs and fur, he becomes a full-on werewolf forced to drive a hot rod against creatures like Frankenstein and the Mummy. Scooby and Scrappy tag along as pit crew, turning the whole thing into a Looney Tunes-style racing circus. The animation quality is pure late 80s Hanna-Barbera, meaning it's colorful but cheap, with characters sliding across backgrounds. But the story is what makes it unforgettable. Watching Shaggy, of all people, become a reluctant werewolf and then race Dracula is the kind of strange only Hanna-Barbera could cook up. For kids, it was hilarious. For adults, it was head-scratching. But as far as crossovers go, it's a fitting finale to the decade's obsession with mashing everything together. So, there you have it. 15 of the strangest cartoon crossovers the 70s and 80s ever unleashed. From cavemen hanging out with superheroes to basketball teams fighting ghosts, the era was a playground of bizarre mashups that were equal parts genius and nonsense. Which one blew your mind the most? Drop your pick in the comments, hit that like button if you enjoyed this trip down animated memory lane, and don't forget to subscribe for more dives into the weird side of pop culture. After all, who knows what other cartoon oddities are still waiting to be rediscovered?